Um, Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this panel about activism. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer. I'm one of the programmers at Portland Film Festival, and we'd like to thank some sponsors. Um, we want to say thank you to Comcast team for the tremendous support and commitment to independent filmmakers. Their ongoing support ensures that diverse voices are given a platform to share their unique perspective in the world. We'd also like to thank Kerner Camera, Portland Mortgage, and Oregon Film. To find out more information or buy tickets online, go to portlandfilm.org. All right, and so we are so honored today to have some amazing panelists in the activism world today. So I'd like to first welcome the team from the Berrigans, Devout and Dangerous. We have Dr. Sue Hagedorn. Can maybe um, we have Jim Reale, who's a producer on the film. And we have Frida Berrigan, as well as Elizabeth McAlister. And we're so honored to have you both here today. And then we have the team from the Puppet Regime. We've got Jay Preston Witt, who's the producer. We have Colby Webster, who is also a producer and I believe featured in the documentary. And we're waiting for Yatika Starfields, correct? She should be joining us. Great. Awesome. Well, you know, this is such an important panel. I think it's always important in history to recognize activism and be a part of that world. And so I just wanted to open it up and maybe start with having you all introduce the films quickly, what your films are about and what inspired you to begin making this film. So perhaps we can start with Jim. Would you like to start?
Why don't I'm going to defer to Sue, who is the director and executive producer, to start.
Okay. Good call.
You know, aren't we lucky, those of us who worked on Berrigan's Devout and Dangerous, because we're telling the story of, you could call it half a century. I prefer to think of it as a century of nonviolent resistance that the Berrigan family has represented, from the birth of the Berrigan brothers, and we're really talking about two Berrigan brothers, but really three. That we're talking about Phil Berrigan, we're talking about Dan Berrigan, and we're talking a little bit about Jerry Berrigan, the three brothers. And then Liz McAlister, and a whole really 2 or 3 generations of nonviolent resistance that the family has led the country and the world really in modeling against, against racism, against imperialism, against militarism, and for love, as Liz, I think, would say, and for beauty. It's not just what it's against, it's for love and beauty. Jim, you want to say something more?
Sure, I can say a few things. I think an important thing to note of Phil and Dan Berrigan and Liz McAlister is that their foundation was in the Catholic Church. Phil and Dan were priests, and Liz was a nun. So their formation came from Catholicism, and yet they took Catholicism and the teachings of Jesus in a much different bent. And so they saw Jesus as one of the greatest nonviolent revolutionaries of our time. And they formed community, Dan with the Jesuits, and then Phil and Liz in Jonah House in Baltimore. And they started this, unprecedented form of activism, nonviolent direct action. The most notable one was burning draft board files back in the early 70s, and then subsequently beginning the plowshares movement to symbolically disarm nuclear weapons or the instruments that launched them. And so those 2 forms of activism, in addition to many other different actions, really led, I would say, I'm going to use the term, though I don't like it that much, the Catholic left from a national level for a multitude of generations. Yeah, and it's also, as Sue has said, it focuses on a family. It's not just like all these kind of radical people here and there. It's the Berrigan family, the Berrigan McAlister family, and the imprint that they left on, I would say, American history. So.
Thank you. Yeah. And then let's hear from Preston with Puppet Regime.
I think Colby just gave a great intro to the documentary. Do you want to give that again, do you think?
I can do my best. I think that the film really tackles this really challenging time in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when Trump came to Tulsa to begin his re-election campaign. And it was the beginning of his tour to do that. And, you know, it was the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. There were protests everywhere. Of course, it was 2020. I mean, we were trying to get a Black Lives Matter mural put down that was shut down by traffic engineering and Tulsa Police Department. But another group was able to get a Black Lives Matter mural put on the ground regardless. But even then, just a few months later, Tulsa became the only city in the country to actually erase a Black Lives Matter mural by milling the street 10 months in advance of its construction date. And you know, there were city councilors that were quoted as saying that, like, you know, we need to do this because some folks in the community just feel it is wary. And that's just such a weird thing to say during such a historic moment, during global protests and unrest, a true uprising. And you're just kind of bothered by it. So many things were happening in our community. There were you know, the Elon Musk and Tesla were, there was a big push from city leaders to get the Tesla Gigafactory put into Tulsa. And there was a lot of friction there around gentrifying a community by inviting like 10,000 engineers into a community that are used to living in California, you know. And it was just this film really gets a snapshot of a very chaotic moment for a community, and a community that's really trying to push back against so much that like I think we've all experienced, just like so much happening at once, crises on top of crises. And just how we decided to express ourselves in the midst of that. And the weird winds of having like TikTok kind of help save the day when it comes to, you know, inflating the ego of these awful people to such a degree that it actually kind of blows up on them. So yeah, that's kind of my intro. It's very strange because I lived it, but yeah, you know, it's something.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That brought up one of my questions. I guess, I mean, social media in the modern day, we're all so used to it. We're barraged with it on a daily basis if we choose to. And I was curious about the Berrigans. Like, what do you think their activism would have looked like in the social media age? In the age of social media, do you think how would that have impacted their message, their actions, possibly? I don't know. I was curious about that when watching it.
Liz, what do you think? Or Frida, what do you think?
Well, I think Catonsville was the action at Catonsville, which kind of launched Phil Berrigan and Dan Berrigan into the national spotlight, was very much an action of its time. Mm-hmm. So May 17th, 1968, Catholic priests and nuns were still held in high regard within our country. Most people went to church on Sunday, even if they didn't go to Catholic parishes. It was still, you know, a time when most other activity shut down. Mm-hmm. So, things were on paper. And so destruction of paper records of draft records could actually be affected by the actions of the nine. They wore suits and ties, those of them who didn't wear Roman collars, or they took care in how they presented themselves. And that was sort of part of the action. And for the time, they were quite media savvy in having called alerted the media ahead of time. I watched this happen over and over again, where people would ask Dan, well, so like, what would that action be today? And he kind of said, an action that really sort of catalyzed something, right? Hundreds of draft board raids happened out of the Baltimore 4 and then the Catonsville 9. And thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I think, it's not an exaggeration, of draft records were destroyed, effectively keeping those particular men from being inducted into the Army, from serving in the killing fields of Vietnam and Indochina, right? And so, so people say, well, what can we do like that today, right? And he said, wrong question. And this isn't quite the social media question, but hopefully it kind of gets it. Wrong question, right? The question is, what can a small group of people do that is consistent with their beliefs and that speaks to the particular moment that they're living in? And so the action might look very different. There is no cookie cutter, there's no playbook, and there's no colonel or admiral leading the whole charge, right? It really is kind of these communities of conscience. And I think social media fragments that, dilutes that, makes that appear perhaps a lot easier and more spontaneous than it really is. I guess there's an invitation in these kind of actions, and the activism of Phil Berrigan and Dan Berrigan and Liz McAlister is still going on today. There are people still on probation. Liz just got off of probation, thank God, for the Kings Bay plowshares that happened in 2018. This is ongoing, and it has evolved over the last 40, 50, 60 years. But I think it really is about connecting person to person, inviting action, and not perhaps the same action, but some action that takes one out of one's comfort zone. And perhaps my critique, and I'm not really a young person anymore, I'm 47 years old, but my critique of a lot of social media kind of geared protest is that it really doesn't take us outside of our comfort zone, and it doesn't take us into deeper relationship with one another. So I'll stop there. I had something to say about burnout and sustainability based on the kind of pre-conversation, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that kind of cued me into that, is that, you're talking about how much work is involved and how much sacrifice is involved in that level of activism. And yeah, Colby, you had also brought up, the need for self-care, the need for support, because you do burn out when you're working, putting that much energy into this work. So I want to ask you that, but I also want to welcome, forgive me if I get your name wrong, Gazelle Ghazi. Did I get that correct? She's the director of Puppet Regime who just joined us. I want to make sure we acknowledge her. But yeah, Colby, I know your time is a little bit limited, so I wanted to give you a moment to speak to that, to the burnout. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think after this last year and a half, I think that it's so worth pushing this to the forefront of conversations about activism and advocacy work, because I don't know, just I only know my experience, but like as a Black man that just went through this 100-year anniversary, like commemoration of this tragic, racially catalytic event that happened in my community. And then to add on top of it, like all of the fires that were just happening to us all collectively, you know, the things that intersected with that, with Trump coming to town, with the whole Tesla conversation. Like, I don't know if I've had a more, had a greater test of my ability to advocate for myself and my community than these last 2 years. And so I've been looking into understanding what is it like to recover from something like this. Like, none of us have really been given the time to process, you know, losing jobs, you know, everything changing, you know, the ongoing supply chain crises, the inflation, you know, and the things that we went through. I mean, so I was on, in the midst of all of that too, there was a protest that spilled onto the highway, and there was a truck with like a 12 or 15-foot horse trailer that went through the crowd, and it went over the guy in front of me's ankle and then destroyed my bike. And luckily, you know, I was able to get out of the way of that. And then days later, the DA circled myself and many others in a report saying that they were looking to identify these individuals to hold them to account for, I guess, being in the way of a truck, you know, that couldn't be patient on the highway, you know, during global unrest, you know. And so I think that really speaks to the film, because it's this idea of this puppet regime and these co-opting of narratives, and, you know, pointing the finger back at the community that's clearly been harmed in all of this, and really holding in this kind of hostage situation between myself and the state, and waking up mornings and not knowing if somebody was going to like drag me out of my house, you know, like and in the midst of that, like, I quit my job because they didn't want to in any way meaningfully address what was going on in the country. And they were trying to be one of the first places to open post, you know, that first wave of true uncertainty. And so I am constantly grappling these days, like the last few months, as things have kind of gotten a little more tame, or we've just gotten used to things, with like, how the hell am I going to process all of this? How am I going to like be at peace with this? And like, how do I continue to live my life in the process of still being so like shook by this lack of reciprocity from the powers that be in my city, in my community, in my hometown? You know, it came as no surprise, but I've never had the highs be so high and the lows be so low. And so, like, how long does it take to recover from that? You know, what does healing from burnout look like from a support system? You know, how many times can I talk about this and it be meaningful towards my healing, and not just something that I'm just kind of spinning my wheels on and just anxiously investigating over and over again? So I have no answers, but I think it's really something to at least put out in the air that, like, I know it's not just me, you know, I know everybody who's been through this timeline we share over the last year has a lot that they have to unpack and a lot of healing to do. And I'm sure some new inner work that needs to be done in light of all of that we've been through. So really just saying that much and hoping that, you know, we get some answers as we, you know, look at the uncertain amount of time it takes to heal through it.
Yeah, I feel like even just by speaking about it, acknowledging it, that's like the first step. So I thank you for bringing that up and sharing your experience. Frida and Elizabeth, did you raise your hand?
Elizabeth,
Mm-hmm.
I raised my hand.
Yes.
And I want to address what was just said, because I think that what it points to is the deep, deep need for community. our brother here needs to be surrounded by people who love him, who support him, who will help him to work through these times, because we need one another. We need one another in this struggle very, very badly. And very few, if any of us, can do it without the loving community or support of community. And I would invite him for a visit where we can sit and talk, where we can raise some of the issues. It's not an easy thing to walk under any circumstances, but it certainly makes a difference to have a sense of community with you rather than be doing it, as it seems, all alone.
Thank you. Yeah. New London's kind of far from Oklahoma, but yeah, you're welcome anytime.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that, because I've been reevaluating what my activism looks like going forward. And there's just no way I can be in as deep as I was and it be sustainable. So it's really interesting how me being active has totally transformed in my mind. And like now, like my body and my mind and my like soul are all saying, you just need to be a person again, like shed what you need to and just be present and be amongst your people and reconnect. There's so much of the volunteering, activism, professionalism, work stuff that I was doing that was keeping me from giving what I wanted to my friends, my family, and my relationships. And so now it seems more important than ever to investigate the systems of community care that are out here and really do want to support me and help me through this. So maybe we did find the answers. Yeah, it just like there's something that feels so radical about showing up as myself at a dinner with friends, and it just feels so different and so much more powerful now. And I'm really trying to lean into that as I, again, continue to process and unpack, and doing it with the people who care feels right.
About that with others who have gone through some of that makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Dr. Sue, do you have a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, there are two things. I'll talk about the difference in the late 60s, early 70s in the Weatherman movement, where we did not have community. I mean, we thought we did, but we came in to the movement because of Vietnam and because, well, talking about media, because it was everywhere. It was on television. We saw the murders of people across the world or around the world. And we became very active, very fast. And we became very angry and took on violence. And that movement lasted about 6 months, really. It didn't last very long. We burnt out. And, I remember being left the main, sort of our main collective was in Chicago called the Weather Bureau. And I was in a collective in Boston, and the Weather Bureau just left us. They just disappeared and stopped giving us directives. And we were just kind of like, well, now what do we do? And we sort of wandered around for a while and separated, and then kind of took up where our lives were going before. It was very, very, very different from what Liz and Dan and Plowshares and that movement that was really about persistence and patience and living the life. We didn't really have a community. So that's kind of a lesson about how not to make change. from my perspective.
Piece of this kind of life is community, community, community.
That sounds like C's, not ABC.
But it's the ABCs of keeping on, keeping on. It's without which it's the very, very rare human being who can do it.
Well, we're sitting in front of one with you, Liz.
No, I have the community, and I have
Yeah.
always had that sense of community. And I have always felt supported by that sense of community. I could not have done that without it.
We
Do
love
you
you, Liz.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Colby and Sue, I think you both have more to say. Your hands are still up or need
No,
to be
I'll
taken
take
down?
'em.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, community has always been a big part of my life. It's really interesting how I've gone through a process of realizing like I have done so much for my community, but I've sacrificed so much for myself. And it doesn't have to be that way when you do have a community, a support system, And so I'll just highlight the work that some friends are doing here in Tulsa around mutual aid and ensuring that, at the least that people in our community are being fed. And that I just feel like it's worth noting the power of being around people and just eating food, breaking bread with people around you who have been through things similar to you or are here just to share space and your presence with you. So just community. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Could I say a few things?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to ask you something. So yes, please go
Oh,
for
great.
it.
Yeah. Let me just ask you first. I can't find the darn, how do I raise my hand? I can't find that little button.
Under reactions.
Go all the way to the right and it'll be something
Oh,
like
reactions.
3
Okay.
dots.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Colby, I just wanted to offer some advice too. I think that especially if you're in it for the long haul, you really need some kind of interior practice. So meditation, yoga, tai chi, something that's going to maintain who you are rather than completely getting lost in what is happening outside of you. And so for us at Jonah House with Liz and Phil and Dan, and of course Frida was a part of the community. We had Bible study and we had prayer. So those were kind of the practices of Catholicism today. So those are still available. Of course, there's so many other practices: Buddhism, chanting, breathwork, pranayama, yoga, tai chi. It really helps you sustain your activism, because if everything is going out, eventually you will empty and you will crumble. There's no two ways about it. And the other thing I want to point you to is that to say yes to every need there is in the world, or at least in our country, is to say yes to violence to ourselves. We cannot address everything, and we have to really grasp that we are limited. We want to do as much as we can, yet at the same time, it's really easy to burn out. So I think if you Google Thomas Merton letter to a young activist, there's a writing there that he did, and it's really brilliant. And I believe it addresses burnout or sustainability. So Thomas Merton, who was one of the greatest minds in the 20th century in Catholicism, he died in 1968 and may have been murdered. There's a theory that it may have been murdered or martyred. But he's got some fabulous writings, so I would point you in those two directions. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
That was perfect. Thank you for bringing that up. I also wanted to touch on sort of the tradition of activism as well. I mean, we've kind of got, a wonderful film about kind of a really, impactful group of people whose legacy is still ringing true today, to the Puppet Brigade, which is much more obviously very current activism. And I was wondering if anybody could speak to kind of that legacy and the traditions involved in activism. Jim, if you want to go for it.
Yeah, I can start if you like. I think we were fortunate, or I was fortunate to join Jonah House, and we had elders there. So that was Liz and Phil, and that really, really helped. And in addition to our elders, we also had a tradition. It happened to be in that particular house, Catholicism or Christianity. And again, those words mean very different things now that they did back then. And so again, Liz and Phil and Dan took Christianity or Catholicism in a very different bent. Again, seeing Jesus as this, one of the greatest proponents of nonviolent change in the world, and seeing his life, his teachings, the Gospels from that perspective. So I'm not sure in today's activist world how much people have access to mentors, the people that are older, that they've been doing this for a long time. They are seasoned, and I think that may be a missing component. So I would suggest to seek out those kind of people, in addition to, as I've already mentioned, seek out your own kind of contemplative practice that will sustain you. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks. I did want to call on David. I know I saw you raise your hand a moment ago, and I don't want to miss you. So if you can unmute yourself, we can hear from you. Oh, let's see.
David, we can't hear you. David, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Uh-oh.
Still can't hear you, David. Okay.
Let's see. We can see it from the host end if we can do anything about that. I don't know if we can, but we'll figure it out.
How about this?
Yes.
Now, well, you see, got to have clear directions. I see mute, unmute. It should say you can be heard, you cannot be heard. No, it's very. I tell you, my book for all the saints, from the blood pouring. There's Phil, 67, to the blood spattering, Kings Bay Plowshare. Did you do that, Liz? No. Anyway, I'm very interested in tactics, big splashes, and media. And that's where you guys, the Portland Film Festival, Sue, your movie, your fabulous movie, The Boys Who Said No, the Chicago 7, Hit and Stay, the documentary on our stuff that Joe Tropia did. In the pictures are worth 1,000 words. But what do we do for action in this place? I see Black Lives Matter. I hear about Antifa, although in Baltimore it's non-existent. It just, when you think of the Kings Bay Plowshares and actions like these, you got to wonder. I mean, what gives me hope? You filmmakers, William Barber with the Poor People's Campaign, social media is like a resource. Like you can Google something. You have Pache a Bene sending out a peace statement every day. I get one. All the famous statements. You have David Swanson, World Beyond World, organizing around the globe. So there's a lot of resources, but in terms of splashy tactics, some property has no right to exist. I'm 80. I don't have to do that stuff anymore, but I've been involved in protests from our blood pouring to gun control, and I love Code Pink, all their tactics, media. Community, I've always found it difficult living with others. I'm sort of a loner, secluded Emily Dickinson type, retreating to the woods and liking that more than community. But it's great. What Liz says is great. And we have Jonah House still going, and we have Viva House in Baltimore. But the media is kind of decamped. So I'd love to see Susan, the people with the boys who said no, out in the West Coast. Susan, I didn't know you were in the weatherman, you bad.
Bad.
Woo! Oh
I
my
know.
God, you guys got out of kind of scot-free, no prison.
We did. That's the thing. We got out scot-free.
You surfaced and the FBI couldn't nail you because their tactics were to entrap you and that you didn't have to go to prison. But remember, with our stuff, the importance of the suffering servant and going to prison and how that was exciting to do. I don't see Black Lives Matter going in that direction, or youths in general. It's not, for me as a writer, that was what we did, gave me something to write about, and that was what you do for action in this place. But now, maybe the films can if you can get them widely distributed. I mean, the Chicago 7 is a great film for maybe a Netflix involving youth to do stuff and not just talk about it. Activism, my God.
Yeah.
Anyway, just random thoughts.
No, it's great. I want to make sure we get to our hand raisers. So why don't we go to Bill Hartman? I believe you raised your hand first.
Yep. Hi there. Hi, Jim. Hi, Liz, and everyone else. So first of all, I'm a longtime activist. After I left the seminary in 1970, I was a CO and got active, was arrested at the Justice Department with Joe O'Rourke and a bunch of others, the Jesuits back then. A placer activist at the Trident Manufacturing Center in New London back in '82 on the 4th of July. But I wanted to bring up, because Jen was asking about energies that are going on now. So a year ago, when Trump was lying about the virus, I was feeling concerned about how much Fox News was supporting his lies. And so I reached out to Bob Smith with Brandywine Peace Community in Philly and George Day up in New York. I met George when I was vigiling at the Yemen vigils at the United Nations with Kathy Kelly and Brian Terrell and others back in 2018-19. So we did a little bit of spot vigiling at Fox News in New York and in Philly. And then everything kind of broke up, meaning George Floyd was killed, Black Lives Matter marches, the violence over last summer with Wisconsin and other places, and then the election that happened. So it kind of put things on the back burner. But in July, George Day in New York reached out to me and said, Bill, you started this last year. We have some people up here who want to do something about Fox. And so we had a conversation and we connected with an organized group in New York that's been around since around the days that Trump started running for election and got elected in 2016. And the group is called Rise and Resist. So I've joined them in the process of talking about this. And since August 24th, every Tuesday since August 24th, there have been folks in New York and occasionally when I'm available in Philadelphia, out in front of Fox News, calling out Fox lies and calling it Truth Tuesdays at Fox. Now, Rise and Resist, besides Fox, they were out on August the 6th at City Hall with the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, asking for the city council president to accept the idea that they should sign on to the abolishment of nuclear weapons. I was there with Bud Courtney, others. George Day was there, of course. Seth Moulton was there. He had the Nobel Peace Prize with him. And beyond that, then August 24th happened, but they've been out protesting and vigiling any number of things. Immigration down at the Wall Street going to Staten Island. Homelessness in the Queens, asking for people's having homes as opposed to closing hospitals. just past Monday, they were out in front of Trump's tower saying, "Florida man, go home," because he was there because of he had to witness or testify, I guess, be interviewed by the courts up there about violence against a protester. So I'm just suggesting to you, Rise and Resist. You can look them up in New York. Quite a good group, active all the time. And I think, and we just had a picnic in September together just to be able to kind of be with each other. But I think that Jim Reale's ideas about needing to make sure you take care of yourself is also important. I've said that to friend George Day in New York, that sometimes we need to be able to manage ourselves as opposed to everyone else. So that's important, but we need to find new ways to reach people. And this is young people and old people doing this in New York. So if anyone's interested, please check out Rise and Resist, and you might find a connection to something to do forward. And I would also say, final question is, I have friends in New York that are asking about trying to see the movie Devout and Dangerous. And I just texted somebody saying it had happened, but it was on, but it was actually only the discussion. So that's what I just wanted to find out also. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to say we're going to try to rally any kind of websites or information you guys have to share and have them in the notes and available. So I wanted to say that. And then let's see. I feel like some people have raised their hands and dropped them. So I'm just inviting anyone of our panelists to speak out now if you have a comment or a question or anything.
Well, I think that the tradition of activism goes back a long, long way. And, for me, and I think a number of people, we were inspired as kids by, by the Wobblies and by the Actions Haymarket, at when was that? 18 something or other. And there's been a long tradition around the world, and what I was aware of as an American, throughout our history, there has always been resistance to war. Before World War I in England, I mean, there's a fabulous book that was written about the resistance movement to World War I. We think, oh, World War I, the war to end all wars. Well, there was a lot of resistance to it, and there's a lot of us, I think, to whom that speaks. That we don't have to just buy into what we're told are the values. And right now, I mean, it's petrifying to see how much buy-in and how difficult it is to kind of sort of tease out what's true and what's not true. So it makes really not just media, but how we use media, how we analyze media. What are kids learning about how to analyze what's going on. And I fear that it's not happening anywhere as importantly or as quickly as we need to. I'm feeling that we're just kind of losing it. Any thoughts on that, guys?
If I could jump in for 1 second and just say, it's sort of hokey, but I think Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think that's a lovely way to see ourselves within the stream and strains of continuity, kind of reaching back into history and kind of also reaching forward. And I think one of the lessons perhaps we can draw from past generations is to let a thousand blossoms bloom, that we don't all have to do the same thing. We don't have to march in lockstep, that those sorts of movements, tip towards fascism, tip towards violence, and tips towards kind of cult of personality, that we can all have our piece of the work and do what we're able to do, and not dictate what other people do.
Should be doing.
And I think that there's certainly within pacifist groups, within the War Resisters League, which I've been a part of for a long time, there's this tension, this wanting to sort of be very pure, But that the enemy of the perfect, is often the good, and that we don't need to engage in a kind of politics of purity, but in a courageous experimentation and real honest critique. Wow, that didn't quite work, but like, if we try it again, let's try it this way. And in order to do this again, I'm going to need, and kind of in dialogue with one another and across movements. We don't all need to do plowshares, right? I think, don't want to ever do a plowshares action. I'll just say it right here. But to have that space exist alongside work at the UN, exist alongside the environmental movement, exist alongside people working against environmental racism and the putting of nuclear waste on native land and nuclear power plants in African-American communities, right? To have all of these movements working together and respecting one another's autonomy and agency and position is a much stronger thing than saying everybody's got to go to jail, everybody's got to do it my way. And I think that we have learned that in the last 40, 50 years, and I think we're more powerful as a result.
Thank you. Very good. Right on.
And then Ghazi, did you have something you wanted to share? Your hand's raised.
Yes.
Hi, welcome.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be on this panel and to be in conversation. I think that this idea of just the intergenerational nature of movements and this kind of work is so important. I know that for me as an individual, as an Iranian-born immigrant to the US who also lived in Chile, like the legacies of my own family members who were leftists during the Iranian Revolution and jailed for 7-8 years afterwards. Sorry, I was just running from my car. And in Chile, the sort of continuation of the movement of Allende from the 60s and the 70s, being very inspired by the sort of how different protest cultures and movements have passed down from generation to generation. And I know for us as well, when we heard that Trump was coming, it wasn't just him, it was also at that time, they were saying like tens of thousands of his supporters were coming. And living in Oklahoma, as Colby had mentioned, just like a month before, we had a protest where a truck ran through and ran protesters over. A protester was left partially paralyzed because of that incident on the highway as well. We felt very kind of cornered and small, and we thought, like, how can we show up to this protest in a way that will sort of amplify our presence? And for that, we were inspired by the work of Bread and Puppet, who was this and continues to be this really revolutionary group who was active, especially during the Vietnam War, in making these massive protest puppets. And so I know Yadika just came on as well, and I would love to hear more from him if he has anything to share. But that was part of the idea, that we would make these massive protest puppets that, when you strap them onto your back, they kind of extend like upwards of 9 or 10 feet into the air. And that was sort of our strategy for, well, we may be small, we may be like a smaller group, we may be also very marginalized because of the state that we live in. Oklahoma is one of like the most conservative states, and it's also a media flyover state. And so the way that plays into a protest is, or this sort of situation was, if something happens to us on the street, we're not really going to get maybe the resources or the help that activists would receive if they're like in a big metropolis like in LA or New York, where there's more organizations and more resources. So we felt kind of cornered in that way. And looking at Bread and Puppet and the work that they did, and thinking of like, okay, how can we kind of be inspired by that and make puppets? And we made 3 puppets, and I think that they helped sort of give some more presence to the protest when that happened.
And I mean, the connection between Bread and Puppet actually in the Devout and Dangerous documentary, the Bread puppet actually shielding and getting Father Dan Berrigan out of escaping from the FBI. I jumped up and down when I saw that. I had no idea. And so, like, just in this small way, knowing that these puppets have what they've, the fact that they're still around and still being used in new and creative ways is, yeah, that's really fun.
I mean, what I'm hearing is we ought to put together an intergenerational group that meets once a month or something on Zoom, where we hear each other's stories, that the same motivations, the same passion, some of the same strategies before and now and in the future exist, and that we could really support each other.
I think that
echo that big time. Just it'd be really great to hear more, to be able to validate the circumstances that our activism lies in. I think it goes really understated how much debt my generation is in, and how inaccessible the reprieve is in like home ownership, or just having enough money to like spend with your friends on dinner or something like that, just by way of inflation. And just how going through multiple like stock market crashes, bubbles and stuff like that, it'd be really nice to be able to validate each other's experiences, swap strategies, and really advocate for one another. I feel like there's this root of problems that lie in how we utilize land, and how we approach housing and transportation accessibility, that is so understated and works against human beings in general. And it'd be really great if we could address these hyperlocal concerns, so that we can create more systems of care that allow us to address more macro, broad concerns. So definitely big ups to that idea of an intergenerational, safe space. So, and then with that, I unfortunately have to leave as well. So I will.
Thank you, Colby.
Thank you, Colby.
Of course.
I had a question too. Jim, you had brought it up about sort of the stages of life of activism, and I kind of feel like this is a good moment to hit upon that as you're kind of talking about the generations of activism and tradition.
Sure. I think Liz and Phil and Dan were an exception to the rule, where they started their activism and they just stayed with it and through their elder years. So I think they are the exception to the rule. But for some of us, we have stages. When I was at Jonah House, I was 28 years old, 28 to 32 years old. Had just a ton of energy and was willing to, put everything on the line, was living in community. So I wasn't concerned about a job, because we had the community, we all supported each other. But I do think there's stages of activism and stages of life. And so I think as we get older, I think our activism can become more subtle, and perhaps we can step into those elder positions where we've had experience, we've done some for some of us, some great sacrifice, and we are there to mentor mentor younger people as older people. So, and that comes from a tradition in India. I've studied yoga meditation in India, where as a person approaches their elder years, they actually, what they call, go into the forest. So it's a much more of a contemplative, meditative time for them. I don't see a lot of that happening in the activist circles, where the goal is to, continue your activism until your old age, which is great if you can do that. But most of us can't. We have other responsibilities, family, our parents, et cetera, our own health. So I think it's important to recognize that there are stages where we have a lot more energy in our life, and there are times where we need to a certain extent, step back from the front line, but still be on the line nonetheless. And so I think I've never heard that being raised in activist circles, and I think it's an important point to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that kind of seems like it comes back to that community building that you're talking about is, you know, having that support allows you to have those human cycles and, you know, support yourself and others too. We have Yatika Fields here, who we haven't been able to hear from. I don't know if your camera's off, but if there's anything you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so I came in on a bit late, so pardon that. But it's been really nice to hear the words that I've heard so far in this. And I was kind of on board with this conversation with Gazelle and Preston on the puppets that were inspired by bread and puppets for the Tulsa Trump demonstration. And just to kind of reiterate what those words were spoken of, those two, you know, I appreciate what they say, and I agree with both of what they say and what they did and what they brought and what they prompted for Tulsa. And I think the bigger mass who watched that rally on TV, and because they were like on CNN, you could see these huge puppets, you know, and I was really interested in the reactions from the Trump supporters, seeing an image of themselves casted upon as these big puppets, you know, and these mocking them almost. Because creating these, well, first there's many steps in what we did. You know, we created them, and that was the community building part of it, coming together, finding the resources, and talking about it. And every day it was a meditation, almost, about discussing what we're doing, how we're feeling, checking in on ourselves, and making sure everyone's okay. And then creating these pieces, these puppets that we knew were going to be on the streets, discussing what our dialogue was and kind of showing the world how we felt in these kind of mock, cartoonish, creative devices that, to be honest, when we paraded them around in the streets in downtown Tulsa in front of these Trump supporters, they were in shock because they didn't know what to think. You know, they were kind of taken aback by this portrayal of them in this very creative way that they really can't comprehend, because I don't think they're that smart to comprehend most of the arts. But with that said, that's how we took that dynamic and component and twisted it into something really powerful, that it built a community for us in the preparations of them and making them. It made our ties stronger as individuals. There's been a film that's come about it through Preston. It just kind of solidified some more creative activism thinking here in Tulsa and what that looks like for community. And then it also did something in that time and place, in that protest, in that intense standoff that we had at certain points. And it just kind of alleviated some of the tension as well, because for real, like, I feel like if those puppets weren't there, I think some things would have went down in some places. But it definitely was kind of like the bandwidth of it all to kind of create this kind of looseness and fluidity with it all, so where people could kind of step back and kind of perceive things in a new light and way. As an American Indian, indigenous from Oklahoma, I'm Osage Cherokee and Creek, and I come from a lineage of activists. My parents are both activists, both in the American Indian movement. You know, my dad was in the Alcatraz takeover from UCLA and then taken over by American Indian movement. And they still gather every day, every Thanksgiving at Alcatraz to kind of remember that. And then even growing up around it, you know, leaders in the American Indian movement. It's just always been something that's been a part of me, who I was, and how I kind of perceive the world as an indigenous person, you know, and as an artist. You know, just by being alive, we are an activist. And I know in another discussion, I think someone else has said it, that, you know, slipping away from activism can come at different points in your life, and you have family and whatnot. But I think if you make activism your life and you live it daily, then there's no other option, because we are alive. We have to fight. There's so many, you know, things that are happening out there that we can't control, but we can help dictate the narrative. So we have to live it, even if we have family, even if we're getting older. It's just a decision that you have to make every day, that you will stand by the fight and do what you need to do, regardless of family and age. That's just how it is. That's how I perceive it as being American Indian. You know, I was just in DC 2 days ago taking photos and portraits of Suzanne Harjo, and she's done amazing work for the American Indian people and leading. Her leadership skills are just unmatched. in what she's brought about for the communities and the whole global aspect of Native, how the Natives and Indigenous people are perceived. So that was a really big, amazing moment. And it just backed my spirit to tell me who I am as an Indigenous person and as an activist. And they have a really amazing show up in DC at NMAI. If any of y'all are in town to check it out, make sure you go check it out. It has a lineage and timeline of all the treaties and then all the activism that's been had in the United States with the Indigenous people. So going back to the puppets, I think it was a great idea. And I think it really did a lot for Tulsa and the activism community here to kind of create a new platform to work from. And I look forward to more, opportunities and possibilities where that took us.
Thank you so much. It was great hearing that. Thanks for sharing that. I know we're already like at an hour, and I know that there's a lot more we could talk about, and we're totally open to it. But I also wanted to give the panelists an opportunity to wrap up if they need to. And I did kind of want to leave on this question for the panelists. What is activism life like for you right now? And let's start with Sue, Dr. Sue.
Dr. Sue. Well, Dr. Sue is a nurse. And I agree with the last panelist. Thank you so much for talking about the American Indian movement. And that activism for me is something, it's kind of an attitude. It's a way of seeing what the world is that we're living in. And for instance, right now, I'm involved as a nurse with other nurses in looking at racism in nursing. I mean, racism has, if you look, and Jim is also a nurse, if you look at the health of the world, or you look at the health of Americans, it oftentimes is related to racial issues. And the same thing is true for nurses. And so we're looking at racism, and we're videoing stories that nurses of color are telling about their experiences. And we've been showing the stories, and we're turning it into a documentary. And, this is already making a difference in terms of how nurses are looking at issues of race and color with their patients and with their own experiences. A documentary is going to come out of it. And I can't imagine a time when I'm not going to be using my media skills and being involved in whatever is going on, and sort of staying alive that way. To me, it is it's just invaluable to be involved in the movement and involved in people's stories and making change.
Thank you. Let's see, the next panelist up in my box is Preston. What does activism look like for you right now?
I'm interested in just in relationship to filming, for instance, a single day of protest action and then the making of one real event that took on an interesting element that is really made me reflect on, okay, so the consequences of activism and of this work can last for a very long time. The Vietnam War can end and you're still in prison protesting that, or the trauma and the pain that happens can last for a lifetime. It's harder and more challenging to make the love last that long too. And so I think about that, and I think about how to actually commemorate actions and find ways to make small, moments of resistance reverberate a bit more. So in the current state, it's like responding to something that happened a year and a half ago, and really recognizing how this happened. Really giving that as much care as it is as the harm. So yeah, I know that there's stuff that's happening in the moment, and then there's telling the story of stuff that happened in the 60s and 70s, and that feels just as important as a kind of activism. This is this kind of self and community care. So I've been feeling in that mode lately.
Thank you. Love it. And Jim, what does activism look like for you right now?
Sure. Well, as Sue pointed to, we are both nurses. I'm a hospice nurse. I'm not sure if I would consider my nursing activism, but I think it's very, very worthy work to be working with the dying. I've been a hospice nurse now for about 8 or 9 years. So there's that. And then I also look to transitioning, either semi-retiring or retiring from that work and doing more work directly with social change. I think with my background of having a meditative practice for 26 years or something, having traveled to India, I would like to at some point be teaching sustainable activism. So teaching contemplative practices. And I think that's something, I don't know if it's on the front line or not. I probably would say it wouldn't be, but is it needed? I would say absolutely. So that's something I want to do more and more, is lead more and more retreats, whether they're online or in person, around people working for social change, social justice, and nonviolent resistance. So I think that's very important work. And at some point we'll make that transition fairly soon. I'll be 63 in January, so I can cut back from the nursing and do this other work. So that's what it is for me now. And at the same point, being a person who tries to be nonviolent in the world and with all my relationships. And, you know, for most of us, that can be very challenging. Just to be just a, you know, kind of a decent person and treat everyone with the utmost nonviolence in the way that Gandhi advocated. So I think activism, it just goes, it's two ways, you know, we're trying to create something outside of us, and we're also trying to transform something inside of us. And that work never ends.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. It reminds me of a quote with another film that's playing the festival, but you know, you can go out your door and change the world sometimes just by an interaction you have. So that's speaking to that kind of level of activism. It just inspired me to share that. But we'll go on to Ghazal. I'm sorry if I'm getting her name incorrectly. Please correct me.
No, that's perfect. There are many ways to pronounce my name, and I'm fine with all of them. Yeah, I really was touched by something Preston said about how to make the love last that long when it comes to activism work. And I think that kind of echoing what Colby has said earlier about burnout, I don't know if I've recovered from the burnout either from last year, and just the ongoing nature of everything. So I think that there's been a shift to my politics as well, or how I approach activism, and trying to like really center the love and the tenderness both towards myself and towards others. I think for a long time, sort of the anger of injustice was very prominent for me, and I think that I'm feeling like a shift towards a more a little softer place as far as like what is centered in a way. And so yeah, I'm currently working more, I guess, on paintings, writings, art. I'm also a librarian in training and in work and study, and so carrying some of that over into critical librarianship and any sort of programming that we can do at libraries as well, looking at libraries as institutions and different ways that we can impact the community as well through literacy and just there's a massive digital and information poverty as well that happens that I think sometimes we take for granted, just like having access to phone or internet or even an email account, that a lot of people in America just still don't have emails or don't know how to access emails, and how much of access to jobs and services and kind of like a lifeline out of poverty centers around that as well. So yeah, looking at activism in new ways and different ways for me.
Thank you so much. And then Yatika, did you have any, I know you said you were just in DC doing some photographs, but what else does activism look like for you right now?
For me, I'm an artist. I'm a painter and also a runner. I just did the Boston Marathon up there actually, and I was working with the big contingency of Indigenous runners up there to discuss Indigenous Peoples Day and what Indigenous running means to the global population of non-native runners in America, and also discussing that on Boston Marathon Day, the biggest marathon in running, and how we need to discuss that and, you know, bring in that narrative of these past runners and winners and discuss that and be more inclusive in these conversations, whether it's in art or whether it's in sports or whether it's on the political terrains and, you know, in government houses in DC, or it's in your community. So I try to live it and breathe it, and just how I am and how I operate, and it's full capacity really. But the ways that I kind of decompress with it and live with it is through movement and running. I do ultras, so these are like long distance runnings, like 2 days, or, you know, so you're out there in these beautiful places, you know, for over like 40 hours. And the training is beautiful because it allows you time to really think and meditate. And it's the same thing as when I'm in the studio painting. I'm listening to music or podcast, or just kind of being in myself, creating marks and making the motion. And then it's a combination of those two things that I come out of it and then have these dialogues and participate in other avenues and venues, or go do or speeches along with my murals. So I'm very oriented in how I operate and what it looks like for me, because it's an everyday action and everyday process. And I try to live by example. You know, there was a time in my life where I didn't. And of course, we're all young, and I was living in New York City and whatnot. And but now as I've gotten older and come back to where I'm from, you know, there's a lot of people here in the Native community and my Osage community that need that guidance and help. But if I live by example through my artwork and movement, I feel like I'm doing justice, you know, my ancestors justice, but also being present to be able to make those changes, and being confident because I gathered these knowledges along the way, but also being strong physically and mentally to be able to take on these roles, because there's a lot of, you know, mental degradation in it. There's a lot of physical prowesses that have to take place. And there's also a lot of things that can come at you, you know, negativity influences for sure, you know, the things that you see and the things you're around. And it's just a tough time, you know. And right now it's just always about, you know, there's in the Native community, there's Line 3, you know, there's DAPL, there's always something. They had the big climate demonstrations in DC last week. So it's just continuous. And the thing with being in Black or brown or a person of color from a community is that you always have to show up. There's always going to be a fight. It's never going to stop. And it's just that you have to be strong for it, you know, and it comes in waves too, how you're going to show up. But you have to be able to share that too and teach it. It is a meditation process, but if you can find a balance in it, it's going to help immensely, because we're only humans. We can only take so much, and we're only so strong, and the world is crippling, but we can be strong enough to survive it in our duration of time to be able to do what we need to do. So.
Thank you so much. It's just like, I feel like this this conversation could be a summit meeting that goes on for like a weekend, and it still wouldn't be enough time. I want to open it up to like any of the panelists once more. If there's anything else you're like, oh, I wish I'd said that, I want to give you that chance. And also, you know, if there's any like questions out there that you just someone hasn't asked that really wants to have this one last chance to ask, it's open. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Like, oh, sorry, Edward, you are muted.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I come in at a much lower level, just part of the activists that were inspired by all of your work and things like that. I operate today with the Great Panthers, who are older older adults, community active, politically involved, always voting and things like that. And we have them in the town. I wish each one of you would be willing to at least give your email address to us. And you like there's something called a scholar in residence. Gosh, we'd love to have you as the activist in residence. All of these people that are in the group think of themselves that they were active and they were in some way, but not to the level of you guys. But it would be great to be associated with you and things like that. We have people, we admire, who went on to PhDs and are now experts on things that relate to older adults and nursing home dilemmas and fraudulency in industry, faith or even profit. But we need you fellas. And if you would somehow permit that, we'd be enriched. And we should know you, and you should train followers. And we do try to be intergenerational to a bit. Give yourself a pat on the back, essential workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Is there, I don't know in the chat if you've put your email address out there? Can't hear you, but I know that some people are sharing their email. Oh, there you go.
I did put it in the chat. If you
Okay.
pick it up, I'd love to be in contact. I admire each of you. Jealousy will get me nowhere. Okay. I never made it to the big leagues like you.
We'll be sure, anybody who's shared their email in the chat, we'll be sure to connect. We'll just do a group email, and I'll send the link to this panel. We'll send the link so that everyone sees it and has an opportunity to connect if you want to.
These are not that top office.
Well, I think we're wrapped, but I also, if anybody has lingering comments, please speak now. But we just thank you. I mean, again, I wish we had a whole weekend to like spend, and but I like Stu's idea of having a group that meets and supports each other and talks, and I think beautiful. And especially in this day of Zoom, even though we're sick of it, it's so possible. So maybe that will come from this.